Take kindly to people door knocking this bloody late. Who's there? Show yourself, you bastard! Who is it? Who? Where the f*** are ya? That's what I thought.
Where the f*** have you been?
Thought I heard someone downstairs. Probably someone from the junk mail company.
Junk mail There is no junk mail company!
Well, sorry for not completely understanding societal tendencies. I'm a 6,000-year-old wizard. Cut me some slack.
Yeah, well, bugger off. I've got work to do here.
Fine, but if someone hits you on the back of the head with the blunt edge of a sword and knocks you unconscious, don't blame me.
That's oddly specific. Well, anyway, Fans Toys has been somewhat of a weird company throughout their lifespan. Starting out strong, they paved the way for third-party masterpiece figures, even outdoing their biggest competition at the time, which was Fans Project. Yeah, a lot of third-party names use the word fans in the title. But as of late, they've kind of been all over the place. Some designs are great, others not so much. Not to mention their release schedule is all over the place. They'll announce a whole bunch of stuff in a very short time frame, then go silent for the longest time, and then they'll release all the stuff in a short time frame. It's not bad per se, but it's just totally weird. And of course the most peculiar thing would be their change in style. Originally they were going for the classic masterpiece style that Takara did, where they had a mix of toon accuracy and, realism, which I, for one, actually did prefer. And their fans did in fact praise them for that. But eventually they went where the money probably was and went for toon accurate stuff. But the weirdest part is, the fans then started praising them for that. Like, come on, pick one or the other. Don't just blindly follow your company and just ignore all the flaws outside of it and just praise all of their supposed weaknesses as innovations. Such is the case with Seaspray, also known as Spindrift, because third-party names and such. Now, there are actually two different versions of Seaspray, one released and one yet to be released, which isn't, all that uncommon for third-party releases. It started off with a brilliant toy-accurate design, because the toon design just looked straight-up ugly. And I'm not saying all toon designs look ugly. Optimus Prime, yeah, that looks pretty nice. Megatron, definitely. There's plenty of an argument for the toon design over the toy design. Not everyone likes the swirls. And Ironhide, well, I don't think anyone wants a toy-accurate Ironhide. But some of the designs really do look ugly. I mean, Seaspray's not the only example. You can see with the Takara Masterpiece line. Oh my god, what am I even looking at here? And unfortunately, Fans Toys seems to think it's appropriate to make another Seaspray toy entirely that's based on the cartoon design, despite the fact it looks like a piece of shit. So today, I'd like to go back and discover what made the original design so special. Greetings, Cybertronians, I'm Dr. Lockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to Fans Toys Spindrift 1.0, or as many like to call him, Seaspray. Perhaps I'm a little biased towards this figure these days, because earlier this year I actually managed to come across a copy of G1 Seaspray myself. Out of all the G1 minibots, he has to be my favourite. I don't care if he's generally disliked by the community, particularly bot posting, he's easily the most adorable of the bunch, even edging out against Bumblebee. That being said, I did get Spindrift before I got a chance to mess with the original Seaspray, so my initial impressions were just based on how awesome the design of this figure is on its own. And in vehicle mode, man oh man does this guy deliver. The way this thing is designed is oh so perfect. It's just wide enough to be somewhat realistic, and it strikes a perfect balance between jagged edges and rounded pudginess. It's also kind of difficult to get across on camera, but this guy is weighted very well. Both the cockpit and the back section, which become the top of his feet and the chest respectively, are die-cast metal, which ends up giving this guy a really premium feel. In general, premium is the best way to describe this guy, right down to the toy-inspired design. Granted, the toon and toy models were far more similar in vehicle mode than they are in robot mode, but there are subtle differences, such as the treatment of the back section and the sharper front area. At least they didn't fill the back with unnecessary windows. Just Why? As per usual, you end up with 2 propellers at the back. Not really sure if these would ever work in real life, but considering they're so entrenched in Seaspray's character to the point where every incarnation has them, it would be a sin to remove them, especially on a toy that's trying to be a masterpiece alike. Fortunately, these are made of really durable plastic, which is surprisingly more important on a Seaspray figure than you'd expect. Try finding a well-priced G1 Seaspray with its propellers intact. I dare you. You also get some weapon storage at the top of the vehicle, and it's alright. I can't help but feel the smaller guns look out of place, and they have a tendency to droop down. I also don't think that he looks that bad without them, aside from some awkward slots placement. The tabs are also slightly lopsided, meaning that they'll always be positioned slightly to the left. It's so minuscule that you'll never notice it, but I can't help but wonder if these were intended to be the same piece, or if I just got stuck with 2 left pieces. This in particular isn't what makes the connection so awkward though. No, that just happens on its own. The tabs are slightly too large for the holes, and it ends up wiggling around. They'll stay in there solidly, but just barely. Fortunately, the main pistol locks in rock solid. It's a little finicky to get in and out, requiring you to finagle the legs. Oh, yeah, that's a problem. This panel is probably the most annoying part of the vehicle mode. It's constantly sinking into the waist area, breaking the sculpt. Still, it's a pretty easy fix, and once it's back in there, it's mostly solid. I do wish the tabs were a little more defined though, especially since the piece isn't integral to the robot mode aesthetic, just collapsing into the torso. As for the pistol, it works. It's appropriately dumpy, just as the character is supposed to be, and I doubt you'll mistake it for anyone else's gun, and that's not just due to the color. Still, I do wish they'd added a little bit of extra paint on it. Seeing as it's coming out of the more realistic end of the Masterpiece family, some liberties in the colors would have been nice. Honestly, without the weapons, Seaspray still looks pretty great. The use of the thighs on the roof works surprisingly well, and they don't look out of place at all. Everything tabs together super solidly too. Aside from that one panel in the center, nothing is going anywhere. I do kinda wish the back section tabbed in. It's not a deal breaker, because the joint is toleranced really well, and it holds in place with ease, but it would have been nice. Another issue is that it's really not flat on the undercarriage, so displaying him in vehicle mode will always cause a downward slope. Honestly, I don't really mind, but considering many people buy Masterpiece for the display options, it really is a bummer for them. Still, what's definitely a positive is that none of the portions on the underside are painted. This means no conceivable paint chipping whatsoever. Brilliant job. Size-wise, as far as the Masterpiece scale goes, he's about what you'd expect from a G1 cartoon in toy size range, although I'm not using the Sunbow chart because f*** that thing. Realistically, this thing would be much larger, much like Astro Train. Why the f*** is he a leader? And consequently more expensive than most current MPs on the market in this mode, but they really aren't going for realism here, so it doesn't matter. That being said, if you're looking for a deluxe Seaspray to fit in with your chug displays, I reckon he'd fit in just fine in this mode. Granted, I don't buy based on scale because I find scale a stupid concept to begin with, but for those that do, he really seems to do quite well. So many reviewers have complained that Seaspray is, well, overcomplicated in his transformation. That's not the case at all. He's actually quite simple. Clever, but simple. I just really don't get the complaints of the over-complexity. Now, I think obviously the first thing you want to do is make sure all the guns are detached. I don't know why anyone would say otherwise. The actual first thing you want to do is get the head up and out of the way, because then that will open up this section here, which will allow you to properly collapse the torso later on. You can also come around here and rotate this section back for later. You just separate the legs, which will slowly get everything untabbed. When everything starts coming untabbed, you make sure these tabs are out of the way. Let's get these up to the sides here, just so it's easier to transform the rest of it. Undo the arms out of those side panels. Now we can work on the feet. First you extend the legs on the double hinges. Then you rotate the feet 90 degrees. And then you come around to the back here and you transform those. Much cleaner than the way Magic Square did it on theirs. And ironically, that's the same way that Titan's Return handles its extra kibble. Although Titan's Return came out at the exact same time, so it's probably just a coincidence. So if you haven't already, make sure this doodad here is fully connected up there. Bring these parts down again so that we can get them around the torso. This part here is on a double hinge, and you just want to get it almost all the way there. Not quite though, because if it is all the way, then the chest won't actually be able to collapse. Make sure the legs are straight before you do this, but then you use the triple hinge here, with that part going 90 degrees like that, and then that little panel that's so annoying in the vehicle mode just going straight into the torso. And you want to collapse it all at the same time so it all locks in place rock solid, like that chest isn't going anywhere at all. Now we can just clean up the backpack, but first you'll have to T-pose to assert dominance. That'll give you clearance to lock these into place with a nice satisfying click. Rotate these 90 degrees. Bring these panels out to the sides, like so. And then you got 2 tabs here and 2 slots here, and they just collapse together to lock into place. There, nice clean backpack. Why can't more Masterpiece figures do this, both official and third party? Come around to the arms, rotate the bicep swivel 90 degrees, and then rotate the wrist 90 degrees back to where it was. It does seem a little counterintuitive, but it is important to get the tabs lined up and also the hands into the slots when you're going the other way. Then you just bring this section down, rotate the head around, and you can bring it back up to however you like it. And there we have Seaspray in his beautiful robot mode. Right out of the transformation, Seaspray does seem a little bland. Like many Fans Toys figures before it, it feels lifeless, although not as much as previous figures. It just doesn't seem to capture the essence of the character, that is, in a static position. If you give him even the slightest hint of a dynamic pose, then oh, beautiful! It's certainly a weird effect, but to truly appreciate this figure, he needs to be in some sort of action pose. In your traditional stance, he just doesn't cut it, but in anything else, he truly shines. From head to toe, he's covered in exquisite mechanical detail and beautiful color separation. It's not overkill like the Siege figures, so he'll fit in with any existing MPs with no problem, but there's enough here to make sure he doesn't look flat and boring. I wish I could say the same thing for the current state of MP. His clown shoes are appropriately large, but not to the point where they look ridiculous. I realize that's how many people prefer Seaspray, but there's something about the more reserved nature of older Fans Toys releases that just does it for me. Also, again, the bottoms of the feet haven't been painted, so chipping ain't gonna happen. The legs do come across as a little bony, but given how they have to compress under the torso, I can forgive it. And as a result, they are excellently poseable. Coupled with the large feet and hefty die cast, this guy has to be one of the most stable Masterpiece-alike figures in my collection, if not the most stable in general. Dare I say even more stable than the Titans. Comparatively, the arms look a little underdone and unfinished, but I do understand that the inflatable arms are kind of a staple of Seaspray's character, so I can let it slide. One thing that they did deviate from character-wise was the torso design. Yeah, I can get some complaints that it's not fatty McFatface, but let's be honest, this design really isn't representative of the G1 cartoon. The G1 Seaspray toy never really had a pot belly, it was more like a utility pack strapped to his chest. If anything, the Time to Turn version captured this very nicely, although the toy does highlight the lack of cheek vents on the toy-accurate face on the Fans Toys version. The chest we have is representative of the toy version, just somewhat scaled back, and honestly I respect it for that. And you know what? So did most people back before the second version was announced. The Fans Toys crowd certainly are a fickle bunch. If you do want to go for a slightly more toon-accurate effect, then he does come with a toon-accurate head sculpt, which is actually what's installed right out of the box. And I've since lost it. Cut me some slack, it's been 2 years since this figure came out. Besides, given the toy-accurate proportions and the surface details, honestly the toon-accurate head looks at odds with the rest of the figure. Yes, this head sculpt is missing the vents, as I've mentioned, but honestly it just works better. I should probably find out where I've left the spare head sculpt just so I don't lose it permanently. Hey Vaughn!
Aye?
Can you go check for the spare head sculpt downstairs? I've already looked up here quite a bit. I think I might have left it down there by accident.
I'm not your slave!
Ah, well it says right here in the script that you are!
You piece of sh**.
I know.
Bloody hell, what's going on here? Well, ain't this a waste of time? There's f***ing down here. What was the f***ing point? Jesus Christ. Waste of time, waste of bloody time, waste of bloody time. Waste of... Cup of tea, anyone?
One feature I do find quite lovely is that if you so desire, you can actually rotate the propeller assembly into his back. This might seem insignificant to some, but back in the day when I was frequent on the custom LEGO creation site known as Mock Pages, I envisioned a Seaspray with the same feature. It's a small unintentional thing, but it really makes it work for me. I realise it's just for ease of access of the head articulation, but I like it. On the topic of the back, look at that, no backpack. In modern Masterpiece figures, this is actually somewhat of a rarity, even amongst Fans Toys releases. Sometimes less really is more. Although that being said, there are a few things that I could ask for a little bit more of. Just in general. For starters, he is a little light on paint. We do get a little bit of paint on the die-cast parts, and it's done quite well and is very durable. Just ignore the paint chip here, as I've said this figure is 2 years old. Just a little secret between you and me, it turns out there is a little bit more paint, just the yellow paint around the neck area for color separation, but if you take a closer look at it, it's actually a little messy. But aside from some highlights on the torso, the only other paint here is the eyes. They are done quite well, but come on, this is a masterpiece figure. Couldn't they have given us some more paint? And for those insisting that it's for the toon-accurate aesthetic, shut up! That's a terrible f***ing excuse. I'm fully aware that there's a Repro Labels kit for it, but I don't know, something just seems off. They've left the shoulders completely empty whilst adding these ugly-ass hazard lines everywhere. It just does not look good. The other issue I have is the feet. Not in their stability, but just in their posability, in particular the ankles. They're decently posable, but I just wish the ankle tilt could have gone a little bit further. He'll survive on your basic stance, but anything crazy and dynamic just doesn't work. And it's a real shame, because this more athletic design is just begging for you to put it in a dynamic pose, although it is a little difficult without a stand port. Bit of a shame. For the most part though, his articulation is solid. His head is on a ball joint with some decent side to side and some alright up and down. No idea why most people prefer a hinge and a swivel on these kinds of figures, because a ball joint is always more expressive. The shoulders are on universal joints, with bicep swivels and double jointed elbows. His wrists also swivel, and he has an opening knuckle, which surprisingly doesn't look too bad. It's mainly in service of accessing the tabs for the gun though. Unfortunately, the gun tabs indecently, even if you sadly don't get a sculpted trigger finger and the gun renders the wrist swivel useless. He does have an unintentional slight ab crunch, but trust me, I wouldn't recommend stressing it. This is actually my second copy, because someone actually broke my first copy at a meetup this way and ended up buying me a second one.
All around me are familiar faces.
If you don't put stress on it, you can barely see it anyway, so I don't tend to count this as an articulation point. Fortunately, the waist swivels with no issue, and his universal hips work just fine. He also has a thigh swivel, a double joint in either can get a little awkward when realigning, full 360 rotation in the feet, and roughly a 30-degree ankle tilt. Again, it's a bummer that they don't go further, but for such a cheap figure, comparatively, I reckon it's okay. Oh, I almost forgot about the tiny guns from earlier. These tabs, which actually solidify the vehicle mode during transformation, allow you to plug them in, and I have to say, they're almost too tiny. Maybe if they were a little further back on the arms, or maybe if the guns were a little bigger or had some kind of attachments at the back like some of the Prime designs, I could enjoy these a little more. But as it is, it's kind of tacked on. It really clashes with the silhouette, so I tend to leave them off entirely. Still, even with a few small faults like this, he's a remarkable figure. If Fans Toys embrace the mantra of less is more often, we could get some more figures like this. Or maybe they'll just stick with going further and further along the overcomplicated toon-accurate path. Oh well. Size-wise, he's a little taller than you might expect in the Masterpiece line, but honestly, I'm okay with that. And as far as chug scaling goes, yeah, I think this is alright, but personally I didn't buy this figure for scale or aesthetic. What I saw was an incredibly fun Seaspray toy that would give me hours of enjoyment flipping him back and forth. And you know what? It may not have been what they intended the figure to be, but by God did they deliver. Earthrise, or whatever the final part of the trilogy will be, may give us a new Seaspray, but honestly, this is the Seaspray for me. This is the definitive article. Given how many G1ers will be putting these up on the market soon in favour of the newer version, I highly recommend you pick this up on the cheap. It's worth the full price of admission, no doubt, but honestly, the timing is right at this point. Get it while you can.
So as we've established, Fans Toys is a deeply flawed company with some rather questionable aesthetic ideas in terms of consistency. Not to mention a lot of their toys are overcomplicated messes. But hey, a broken clock is right twice a day. As long as I've owned this figure, I've kept expecting to get over the honeymoon phase, but honestly, I never have. He's still an utterly fantastic figure, almost 2 years later, or pretty much 2 years later, I believe. He's bloody brilliant in pretty much every department, aside from maybe not many painted details and slightly underwhelming articulation. The points are all there, but some of the pieces here and there don't move as far as you would hope. Still, all the main hardware is here. He's got a brilliant sculpt, beautiful colours, an awesome alt mode, and a very fun transformation, making me have absolutely no desire to purchase the second version. If you're not that invested into any specific Masterpiece line, or if you absolutely love the way this looks just like I did, or if you just want a deluxe Seaspray to stand in with your Chugbots, I can't recommend any other figure.
Actually, I think you can.
Who are you? And what the f*** have you done with Vaughn?
His fate is not of your concern. Now, if you'll kindly come with us, we do not wish to make this difficult.
Nobody move! Nobody f***ing move, I swear! If any of you take a single step further, I'll shoot you in your f***ing kneecaps, you bastard!
Are you sure this is entirely necessary? And gave the figure a fairly decent score.
Do not doubt the wisdom of our forefathers. Our lords and masters at Fans Toys have declared the first outing of Spindrift obsolete. Oh, you're awake. Brilliant! The concussion will make this much easier for us.
What? Hey, I suppose we haven't introduced ourselves. We are the Guardians of the Fans Toys Order. Fans Toys!
Right, so you're essentially a cult that kidnaps everyone even if they actually like the figures.
In a manner of speaking, but thankfully we are far from your traditional pyramid scheme. We truly keep the peace amongst third-party fanbase and remind others who truly reign supreme.
What, with lifeless sculpts, horrendous kibble management, and overcomplicated engineering?
It would seem as if the heresy has penetrated deeper into the subconscious than we'd hoped. Next thing you'll be telling us that Masterpiece Hot Rod is better than Hoodlum.
Oh yeah, so much better. So much better that they delayed the figure to not clash with the Takara one for a couple of years.
Do not blaspheme!
You're a loony!
And you are misguided! We should kill you! But no! We shall offer you another way.
Sir, maybe this is a little drastic.
Nonsense!
Shouldn't enrolling him in some events do the trick?
You haven't seen how terrible his content is.
No, no, what are you doing? What are you doing? No, 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 please, no, 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 please, don't do it, please, no, no, please, no, please, get away from me, please. My final score for this figure is the lowest score I can give. Although it is produced by the best third-party company in the business, it is not too inaccurate and as such shall be purged. Do not buy it. Buy the second version coming out. Buy Fans Toys Hoodlum. Buy Fans Toys Tesla. Buy Fans Toys Quakewave. Buy all Fans Toys products except for this one. It is your duty. It is your duty. It is your duty.
It is your duty. It is your duty. It is your duty.